So, hi, my name's Ann Gallivan. I am an interviewer today for Lessons of the Sixties, a project of documenting social justice organizing in the Washington, D.C. area from 1960 to 1975. Today our camera person will be Bonnie Rowan, who's a member of our steering committee, and also asking questions and interviewing will be Anka Decker. All three of us are on the steering committee of this project that we're talking about. Now, today's the 16th of February 2017, and we are looking at the papers of and life of James Stockard, who was a leading civil rights advocate in Arlington, Virginia, from the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And we have with us his three children. Would you introduce yourselves?
Yes, I'm Janet de Merode, and I was in the school system for the 12 exact years that my father was on the school board. So I started in 1955, 1 year after Brown versus Board of Education, and I graduated from the public school system in 1967, all of it in Arlington County.
And I'm Ruth Stockard Flynn, and I also went to Arlington Public Schools for my entire career, but I'm way older than my dear sister.
And I'm James G. Stockard Jr., or Jim, Dad's only son, and I spent my entire career in the Arlington County Public Schools as well. I'm the oldest of all of us.
Now, why is your dad such an important figure in this historical period? Tell us briefly.
Well, briefly, he was extremely interested in public education all of his life, and having been involved in PTA movement in Arlington, he was asked by one of the two non-national parties that operated within Arlington County, ABC and AIM. He was asked by ABC to be a candidate for the school committee in 1955, began serving in 1956, just after the Board of Education, Brown versus Board of Education decision. And he ran, as did all the ABC people, on a platform of implementing Brown versus Board of Education, and became the de facto and strategic leader of that effort for the next 12 years. And so we, his children, and I think many other people in Arlington, consider him one of the important figures in moving past that block in our national history.
That election that you're referring to, the campaign and election, that was 1955 when he ran, and that was a nasty election, wasn't it? A nasty campaign.
It really was.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I can remember as kids, our family was very involved politically. Politics was what was talked about around the table. So when Dad ran, we were also very involved. We were slapping up posters in the middle of the night on poles over the ones they'd slapped up the night before, and it was hard fought, but we also realized that what was going on here, because we watched TV and read national newspapers, is that in many parts of the country, governments were resisting Brown versus Board of Ed, or judges were making orders, but here was a community that was going to vote on it. They had a really clear-cut decision, and they were going to vote on it. And so that's why this seemed like such an important election.
I was a little bit young at that point, but I can remember gathering in a church where all of the members of the Arlingtonians for a Better County, ABC, and was there in the precincts would call in the results in each vote, and a group of us little kids would be in the basement, and the folks would give us a little chit with the number on it, and we would run it up the stairs to where all of the members of it and all the supporters were, and we would hand it to the guy, and he would put it on the board, and everybody would cheer. So we felt we had a very important role, at least.
Yeah.
This has been a staple of our lives. We always sat in front of the party conventions every year on the television, made notes of which state had cast which electoral votes and who was getting the nomination and so on and so forth. So we were very used to political life being an important part of the conversation in our household. And for Dad to be a candidate was doubly exciting. That was very, very cool. And added to that, it had certainly become an issue at that point of not just us versus them, but an issue of important moral content for our community. And our dad was on the right side of that moral issue. And so there was even more pride. It was fairly clear from the slate of people nominated by ABC which of the candidates that ABC had nominated would get the most votes, and which would get the second. Dad was pretty clearly the third candidate, less well known around the county than the other two were. So the question of whether he could get more votes than the best candidate from the other party was a constant conversation in our house, and so it was gratifying that happened.
So that's the way the election worked, that everyone voted for who they wanted, and then the people who got the most votes, whatever group they came from,
That's right.
became the
That's
school
right.
board.
That's right.
Because of the Hatch Act, you weren't allowed to run with party slates, with major, political party slates, because government employees were not permitted to be involved in local politics, and everybody that lived in Arlington was a government employee. So these other community groups formed, and as you say, that was the facility of the voting. It was just, and there was an independent, at least one, I think, who thought about running, who might have also gotten seats. So it wasn't clear until the end of the evening that the win had happened.
It certainly could have been possible that there were, I believe, 2 AIM members whose terms had not expired at that
Right.
point.
Explain AIM.
I'm sorry, AIM is the Arlington Independent Movement.
Right.
That was the somewhat more conservative group of candidates, and Arlington's for a Better County, as Janet said, was the more liberal group of those groups. But certainly likely that the final results could have been 2 ABC and 1 AIM, in which case on the overall board, AIM would still have been in charge. So it was a big victory that all 3 ABC people were elected, and therefore the tenor of the board would change in the direction of integrating our schools.
Do you think it was any, was it related, this later thing that elected boards of education, how do I want to say this? Didn't the Virginia legislature ban elected school boards after your dad won? Was that a coincidence or not?
Tell us that story.
Tell us that story, yeah.
Not at all a coincidence.
Yeah.
You want to start?
I understand less about it, but I think than maybe the two of you who are older. But I do know that later on, the Virginia legislature passed something after my father died, saying that they were wrong.
That's right.
That James Stockard should be honored for that work, and having removed the elected school board facility from Arlington was, and having them appointed by Richmond was not the way to go. Am I correct on that?
Yep, absolutely.
You'll remember that in those days, Harry Byrd was in charge of politics in Virginia. I don't remember in those days whether he was still a senator or he was sort of in retirement, but pulling strings from behind the scenes. There were clear statements by him that if people are going to be like those people in Arlington are, then we're going to have to not elect school boards anymore. It was a very direct response to Arlington electing 3 progressive people in the midst of massive resistance, which already existed as a policy in Virginia after Brown versus Board of Education.
And that was, I think, their public rationale for it. Well, we have this statewide policy of massive resistance, and we have this rogue board up there, in Arlington, which is going another way. They're going to involve us in lawsuits. It'll cost a lot of money, da-da-da-da-da. And Dad was one of the ones. Dad was from Texas with, if he wanted to, a Southern accent. Didn't always want to, but now and then he could come up with a Southern accent. And so he was sent to argue. It was the Moncure bill which was going to do this. And he was sent to argue in the state legislature in favor of leaving the elected board in Arlington. And while I think he made no doubt, an effective argument,
Sure.
Out went the elected board. So no more elected school board, although the people who had been elected, this was soon after they were elected, and the people who had been elected were permitted to serve the rest of their term. So he and the other 2 ABC candidates completed their term.
How long?
4-year terms, right?
Dad served for 12 years.
And there were 3 terms.
3 4-year terms.
And somewhere in the middle there, prior to the Moncure, I think, was when the massive resistance had taken traction. And as chairman of the board, he was subpoenaed to go into federal district court and explain why Arlington was dragging their feet on implementing the law of the land, Brown versus Board of Education. And my father, I kind of, as a kid, I thought, oh, that's scary to go into court, but he loved it.
Yeah.
I think
Oh,
that
yeah.
was one of the
Yeah.
major annoyances to Richmond, was that he would give the votes. Well, we're trying, but these 3 people on the board have voted against it. At that point, the AIM had the majority, but he was still chairman. He was still, even with them in the seats of the majority.
Right.
So he was naming names on votes and everything, and that, I think, was
What the state did was it decided that from that point forward, school boards would be appointed by the county boards. From ABC's point of view, that's just fine, because they could concentrate all their effort on controlling the county board. And so Dad's second and third terms were as an appointed member of the board by the Arlington County Board.
But I think there was one of those times when the more liberal political group did not have control,
That's
and
right.
yet he was appointed.
Still.
Because the thing about Dad was, you knew where he stood, right? And they were willing to have him be 1 vote out of 4, which he oh so often was. So, but he was honest and thought of, very highly by people on both sides, even that disagreed with him. So he got appointed even when they didn't have the majority.
What do you think was your dad's motivation, original motivation for this kind of brave action?
We talked about that a little earlier. It's a little hard to know. I asked him that, but my great advantage, and maybe Ruth's as well, but I was just old enough in the important parts of this story, in the beginning of this story, that Dad would talk to me about strategy and about what he was trying to do and so on. And I learned some very profound political lessons from those conversations. And I would ask him about, how'd you do this? I mean, remember, he grew up in a cotton farming Texas town where when we visited every summer, every time an African American was referred to, and there was quite a community because they all worked on the cotton farms, but they were always referred to with a possessive foreground, right? That guy over there is Carl Stockard's blank.
Yeah.
Oh, that's Joe Brown's blank. And so that's the context in which he grew up. Every time I would ask him about this, all he would say was, this is just the right way for human beings to react with each other. This is the right thing, so you have to do the right thing. And I think all of us have conjectured at one level or another that a big part of that came out of his faith. He was raised as a good old rock-solid Southern Baptist. We were active members of a Southern Baptist church in Arlington, where some bad things happened. But I think that a big part of this was that Dad had memorized all those Bible stories.
Yep.
And
Love your neighbor.
decided that made sense. And the Bible verse doesn't say, bring all the little children to me except the black ones. And so I think this was in some great part his religious upbringing.
Well, he said it once, either in an article or to me directly, that he had 2, I think it was in an interview he did with Ed Campbell, who turned out to be the lawyer on some of the major cases for Arlington later on. But in this interview with Ed Campbell, he said, well, I had 2 criteria when I got ready to take a vote. What would Jesus do, and what would Thomas Jefferson do? And if I could satisfy both of those, then that's where I was going to vote. But you remember what happened at the church more distinctly than we do, because we were gone.
Yeah, Dad was such a strategist, and the white activists like himself and the black activists united in some of their activities to protest. And I could think of 2, but the one at the church Ruthie was talking about, so they had gone off to college, and I was going to church 3 times a week. We were really, really active players in the church. My father had been written out of the deaconship that he used to have because of his views in the school board. Both my mother and father's Sunday school classes had been removed from them. But we were hanging in there. But my father always believed you work from within. So they got into deciding to challenge the white church that we attended with having black activists collude to bring a family to the door to see if they could be seated. And the liberal deacons and members of the church wanted to just test it. And so when that family presented themselves, the deacons would not seat them, at which point all of the liberals got up, including me. My father took my hand. I didn't know what was going on. I think I was 13 years old or something. And out we marched down the aisle and never went back. Never. So my father really felt that the churches had let down the community with not taking an active role in desegregation or promoting integration. He really felt that they were way in the dark ages.
I want to ask you another question about the 1955 campaign and election. In the newspaper clippings that are in your father's records, which you're donating to us today, there are a lot of newspaper clippings with letters to the editor and then answers back to them. 1955, and there was a particular group called the Defenders that took out ads and wrote letters and stuff like that against everything your dad was doing. Can you talk a little about who they were and what their language was? Do you remember any of that?
Can you include the question in your answer?
Yes.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
The Defenders, as I remember, were a group of ultra-conservatives, and they would during periods of important votes and during the 55 campaign, they had an ad every single day in the local paper. And the ad would have a part of a quote, right? Just enough to make you think that they were the good guys. Mm-hmm. and so they were just generally opposing any forward action and in favor. And I think they made themselves known who the individuals were, but the ads in the newspaper were anonymous. You didn't know exactly who these people were.
I was struck by some of the language that were in the letters, and not the ads, as you said, but
Right.
in the letters of people defending the defenders.
Right.
And the language was the old stuff that didn't talk really about integration. It talked about states' rights and things like that. And those that we now know that those are really code words for.
There were lots of code words during that time. Some of them, they would talk about not spending too much on a new school.
Yeah.
Let's just add to this ratty-tat school we've got here, that one set of people is going to. Or we can't buy another bus, So a lot of them were framed in fiscal or, some other context than what they really were.
I wonder what year it was that you left the church, that you walked out of the church, and what church your family went to after that.
We went to no church after that. My father really lost heart with organized religion. He was still a very spiritual person, he and my mother especially, but we did not attend a church after that. And what year? I must have been about 12 or 13. So what does that make it? 61, 60, something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah.
61, 62.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't know if the Defenders is that the same as the neo-Nazi?
No, that's
No.
different. No.
Different group.
One of you that I talked to early on described something like that. People coming into meetings.
Right. Yeah.
Can you recall?
Do you remember the story Dad would tell?
No.
Because I do.
Go ahead.
No way. It takes a village here.
We were raised as a village.
Yeah.
There was a story, and I think he told this story. Once, as we were beginning to have children, we would have family reunions that were sponsored by Mom and Dad to get all the cousins together. And he told this story to all his grandchildren. Once there was a meeting that was during the heat of, shall we go ahead and go forward with our plan to integrate the schools. And there was a neo-Nazi party led by a man named Norman Lincoln Rockwell.
George Lincoln.
George. Norman did pictures.
George did hate.
Sorry, Norman.
And Lincoln.
and all those people. And so he had formed this, what we assumed to be a very small group of people that wore brown shirts, brown pants, and all the paraphernalia. He had a house in Arlington with swastikas painted on it and all that sort of thing. And he and his group came marching into a school board meeting one night when the board was sitting all in a row and there were chairs, and they walked with briefcases like this down the center of the aisle and sat on the row right across from the board, and they put the briefcases on their laps, and one of them made it be known that they knew how to work guns. So the fear, of course, was that that's what was in these briefcases. But the public meetings were a whole nother set of issues that had to do with a lot of the issues that these people worked on didn't sound like they were integration issues, but they were. At public meetings in Arlington, blacks and whites could not sit on the same side. There was a black section and a white section.
By law?
By
By
law.
law.
By state law. And so they decided, the black activists and the white activists decided that they wanted to challenge this and they needed a lawsuit to do it. But they didn't want to impose on one of their black activist friends, because going to jail would be the result of violating this law, and they didn't want to do that. So one of the white activist women went and sat on the black side, was arrested, had a lawsuit. Now there were open meetings. So there were just, so many issues that played into it.
As Janet has said, Dad was an ultimate strategist. One of those really important lessons I learned from him early on when I realized he wasn't always making the motions that would take some new step. Because you should just know that after the school students were integrated, Dad immediately said, well, we can't integrate the students if we don't integrate the teachers, and we don't integrate the bus drivers, and we don't integrate the coaches, and we don't integrate the social events. And so he was always thinking about the next step of making this really a school system for everybody. But he was such a strategist that he said to me, Jim, I've become a lightning rod. The minute I make a motion, everybody else on the board runs away. So what I have to do is I have to get somebody else to make the motion, and maybe somebody else even to second the motion, so I can just be the third vote to make it happen. But I'm 15. Dad, you won't get the credit for this. And it's old news now, but Dad, it was the first time I'd ever heard it. Jim, it doesn't matter who gets the credit. It's just getting the work done. And that's the goal, and you've got to figure out the best way to get to the goal without bothering about who gets the credit for it. And so he would arrange for people, he would call up with Bruce Harmon's dad and say, Lindsay, I need you to come to the next meeting. I need you to get up and make a speech about X, Y, and Z. Because we got an issue coming up, and I think if somebody from the audience makes a big speech, I can move a third vote around on that one. And so Lindsay would show up and make a big, strong statement. There was quite a network of people, and Sue, my wife, and my sisters and I, who had a circle of friends that included many parents who were very much a part of this movement. So that my best friend, Carl, his parents were critical parts of this movement and worked on the campaigns, and we saw them at our house all the time. My future wife's parents were a critical part of this movement, greatly respected by mom. They had campaign positions and worked hard and volunteered and so on and so forth. So we had a bunch of friends who, and it's an interesting thing, at least in my experience, I don't know, I've never asked my sisters this question, I don't remember anybody in my high school experience, among my peer group, among my high school friends, saying to me, your rotten dad is just spoiling everything. The only comment I remember from friends of mine were, good for your dad, I like what he's doing, it's important for us to be doing that. Now, we self-select our friends, I understand that, so partly I'm sure I self-selected people that were going to reinforce my own views, but did you guys ever have critique from your friends?
I did.
Yeah, did you?
And they weren't really friends.
Yeah.
As you say, you self-select your friends. But there were kids on the playground who would say my father was a, in-lover and so forth. There were ugly comments. Did you get any? You were younger.
I don't remember, but I do remember the threats on the family, and I think maybe I was a little more affected on that with you guys out. At one point, Dad received a call saying, we know how your daughter walks to school. And I was going to Swanson Junior High School at that point, the middle school. And
About 4 blocks away.
It wasn't too far away, but I had to be followed for a couple of days by plainclothesmen going to school, which we thought was really funny because they'd get there late and I'd be late to school. So we cut that out after 2 or 3 days of that. But, and we had threats like that, and of course, the major one being the cross being burned in the front yard, which was a major event.
What year was that?
Jim and I were trying to figure
Trying to
out.
figure it out, because we both remember it.
So he must have been in high school, and I would have been at the end of primary school.
So late 50s, 58, 59, something like that. Also, my voice dropped fairly early, and I sounded a lot like Dad on the phone. So I would sometimes pick up the phone and would say hello, and somebody would think, oh, I got Stockard, meaning my dad. And then they would issue a long set of invectives about all the evil stuff he was doing and how somebody was going to get him and so on and so forth. I took a call like that a week, in the early years of this fight. Just
Were you
again because
scared?
my voice.
Did that scare you?
I don't recall that it scared me. I certainly always reported it to Dad, and it didn't seem to scare Dad, so it didn't scare me. That was probably naive not to be scared.
Well, I had one, and they talked about how they were going to murder we children and what we would look like, and our parents would find us and everything. And I told it to Dad, and Dad said, don't worry about that. People that call you on the phone are too chicken to come and do anything.
Right.
And so his being bold and brave about it sort of made us feel.
Right.
I was worried about him sometimes. We had a driveway with a garage and a hedge, and there were some dark spaces, So I was worried a little bit about him sometimes, but not about us.
We looked back in his diary, and he was at meetings 300 nights out of 365 for just straight, and sometimes 2 or 3 meetings. And my mom would be kind of keeping us with the homework going, and she would just explain that this was important work and it was good work. I remember in particular in the archives you'll find a piece of paper where they had cut out a picture of a man who'd been bloodied and beaten, and and cutting out the letters it said, this could happen to you. And that one scared me, and Dad, again, like to you, he said, these people are cowards. Don't worry about them.
And the Nazis put a whole pamphlet out on Dad and stuck it under everybody's windshield wiper at church when we came out. And it was talking about how he should be hung in front of the Supreme Court House and that sort of thing. So it felt real.
Yeah.
It felt like people were angry about it.
All this time that your dad was so busy on the school board, he also had another job, didn't he?
He did.
He did.
Tell us about his day job. What was his day job?
Well, it follows through with his interest in education. He first came to Washington. He always told us one of his lessons in life is you have to have a marketable skill.
Yes.
And his marketable skill, because he after all, he lived through the Depressions. His marketable skill was typing. He was a really good typist. And so he came to Washington originally to be a clerk for the federal government, and then moved up and discovered a real interest in human resources and then in training. And what he was a training specialist for the federal government. He designed programs to train other public officials. He was the chief of training for the 1950 United States Census. We children still all remember that he would bring home the film strips
Right.
that were to be used to train the enumerators. You
We
remember in
were
those days?
trained.
He figured if those little kids can understand the film strip, maybe my enumerators can figure it out. And so he worked for various agencies: the State Department, the General Service Administration, the Census Bureau, the Postal Service.
Yeah, set up the
designed
Postal Service Institute out there.
Training Institute, yeah.
In Maryland, yeah.
So education was always the thing that he was interested in. And I would say he was very proud of his professional career. He served at the professional organizations that tied together training specialists from around the government. He published a couple of books about his subject matter. And I think he felt very good about that. But he would absolutely tell you the thing in his life he was most proud of aside from a few tennis victories. But the thing he was most proud of was his service on the Arlington County School Board. That was what he felt was, if you will, a calling.
And it wasn't easy having the federal job as well as the other.
Right.
Because the federal government wasn't crazy. There was this guy named Hoover, and they were, and I think still, if we did a FOA request, we would find our phone was clearly tapped, but there was this feeling that you shouldn't, get real active in these political things. And so at some point, there was a loyalty oath proposed by the folks that were very, very conservative on the board. They were going to make every teacher sign a loyalty oath so we could be sure there weren't any communist teachers. And my dad, I think, was the sole vote against it. And he went into work and they said, his boss called him in and he said, "Does this mean you're a communist? You're definitely going to have to explain this." And so Dad said to him, "I voted against it because, one, it's only applying to teachers. It doesn't apply to administrators, bus drivers, anybody else. That, is unfair to teachers. And secondly, it's not going to do any good because if they are, they're going to lie," right? So, and in spite of that, he said to his boss, "I want you to do a full investigation of me. I want the whole thing, find out when and if I ever was." And I'll tell you right now, I never was. And so they did a full investigation, and he was cleared, of course. But I think there were, strifes between the two occupations.
And there were moments when he thought he would lose his job.
They really were.
Yeah, which would have been very hard
Yeah.
on the family economically.
Right. And speaking of that, we should mention that we don't say Mother's name a lot, but she was such a part of this. She, not only did she do everything like mimeograph things and type, labels and that sort of thing, but he could never have done what he did without her, So.
In every sense.
In every
emotionally,
sense.
physically,
Absolutely.
logistically, morally.
Yeah.
Right.
Because every time he had to take some tough, courageous stand, we know she was right there saying that's exactly the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You should absolutely do that. And she would cite all kinds of support for why he was doing what he was doing. So she was very, very important to him.
What was your mother's name?
Nadine.
Nadine Johns.
What was your maiden name?
Johns,
Nadine.
Johns.
You just touched on the cross burning. I wonder if you all could tell us your memories of that.
It was dramatic, but it was short-lived. To my knowledge, we never found out who did it. We looked out the window at some point, and there it was burning away. I don't remember, Dad went out and put it out, I guess, or Dad went out and put it out and threw the stuff in the trash can, and that was the end of that. And I think probably, I can't quite remember this, maybe Janet does, but he probably came in and said one of these same statements about people who do things like that and run away are cowards, and we don't need to pay any attention to them.
It's pretty intimidating still.
Yeah.
Well, and I don't know what his heritage in Texas might have been about those kinds of hate activities in Texas. That I never heard any stories like that, but probably he wouldn't have told us any if there were some. But there certainly is a heritage there that might have caused him to be scared, that at least we never heard about on our end.
Did any of you, or probably all of you, have the experience of being in an integrated classroom?
It's an interesting, you should ask that question from this side to that side.
Yeah.
When I went to Washington, I graduated from Washington in 1960. The fall of 1959 was the first moment when they were eligible to be, you should know, if you haven't seen this, one of Dad's very interesting diagrams for us early on was the school districts when he first came to the school board. There was a small community of black people that lived in the northern part of the county, called Halls Hill. A small community that lived in the southern part of the county called Green Valley. As you know, most of Arlington is east-west roads running over into the district, and Glebe Road's one big south station, north-south road. So there was enough black people in the north to have an elementary school up there, and enough black people in the south to have one there. But there weren't enough junior, senior high school age kids in either part of the county to have a school. So they built a junior, senior high school in the southern part called Hoffman Boston, and drew the district for that school around the Community Halls Hill, probably gerrymandered right around the lots where black people.
Right.
And then it went down one side of Glebe Road for 5 miles, around Green Valley, and back up the other side of Glebe Road. It was the most dramatic barbell you've ever seen. So the short story is, my class had one African-American student that joined us in January of my senior year, and I know it will come as a shock to you that he didn't graduate on time with us. He graduated later in the summer, as I understand it. So when our class graduated, it was 1,000 white kids. So I never had the experience in high school or college of being in a classroom where were also black kids.
Right.
Ruthie? She's
I'm 1 year
2
behind
years, 2
him.
years younger than me, but so much smarter than me. She's only 1 year behind in school.
Exactly. And I think there might have been 4 black students in my graduating class of 1,000 at Washington Lee High School.
And the young
Now-
spring chicken.
30%.
30%.
People of color. In
Well,
my
your dad won.
Washington.
Yes,
Your dad
yes.
won.
And this is what, 7 years?
7 years. This is not.
7 years.
Yeah.
And all, as you will hear in a later tape from my wife, and all in a peaceful manner.
That was so important to these people. They had seen Little Rock, and it hadn't been long before. And the black activists and the white activists said, we are not having Little Rock. We are going to do this and do it right and do it without violence. And that happened.
And that happened. And my father was the only member of the school board who attended that morning to see it, because he wanted to see how it would transpire. The others stayed home in a way. They were afraid there would be violence. But,
Yeah.
my sister-in-law should be sitting here.
Yeah, right.
We'll meet her later.
Yeah, you'll meet her, yeah.
But she was there that day, so, yeah.
Well, thank you, family of James Stockard. We appreciate your spending our time with us today, and also we appreciate your donation of your father's papers.
And we wonder if there's anything you'd like to say.
Anything else you want to say before we talk to your sister-in-law?
I would just say that the one thing in the boxes of materials that I loved, that I always focused on, and Dad said it was one of his favorite things too, was a handwritten note, kind of a scrawl, not all well spelled, of a piece of paper like this that was on his desk one morning when he went into work, and it said, "God will help you work on." And so someone had done that.
Yeah.
We're delighted that this project and GW have agreed to hold Dad's papers. We hope they'll be useful for people. We know a good deal, not everything of course, but we know a good deal about the national leaders of this movement and how important and critical they were to this. But for this kind of social change to happen, it is important for there to be local people who decide to be a little courageous, decide to be bold, decide that change is important and that they can lead the way to that. So we hope that your archives will contain the stories of many of the people that made this happen at the local level, because that's the kind of courage that we need for social change continuously as we go through each of the changes that we're
Very
asking
timely.
for.
Yes.
Exactly right. So we're grateful that y'all are going to make
Thank
this
you,
available
thank
in a way that will, I think it's fair to say that we might have read about this person from afar, but Dad was our hero, even if he was our dad. He would have been our hero regardless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.